On tonight's summary of the Israel-Hamas War, day 155, Hamas releases the names of 4 more hostages the group states were killed in IDF bombardments of the Gaza Strip at the end of February. Qatar reportedly threatening Hamas leaders that they will be expelled from the country if a deal between Israel and Hamas is not reached. Substantial IDF bombings reported in Rafah as the IDF intensifies its operations both in the western parts and the eastern parts of Han Yunis. U.S. President Joe Biden states that with regards to certain aspects of the way the war has been run, Prime Minister Netanyahu is doing more harm to Israel than he is doing good. Hello everyone, I'm Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute Fellow at the University of California, Irvine. Here I bring you the summary of the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas War. It is currently the evening of March 9th, 2024 in the United States, the morning of March 10th, 2024 in the Middle East. Starting with the hostage situation, after on March 1st the Al-Qassam brigades reported that 7 Israeli hostages had been killed in IDF bombardments in the Gaza Strip, and at the time they published the names of 3 of them, today they published a video with the names of the other 4. According to the Al-Qassam brigades, the 4 killed are Alex Danzig, Eliyahu Margalit, Itzik El-Garat, and Ronen Angel. According to Al-Qassam, they were killed in IDF bombings at the end of February, and the group only discovered this at the beginning of March 1st. In Israel, there was no official comment. Initially, there was a report that the Al-Qassam brigade stated that 2 people had been killed. However, their names were quickly erased from different websites. Since then, there's been no official comment by the government or the IDF. Likely, this is falling under IDF censorship. Right now, there's no official comment from Israel with regards to this statement by Hamas. Other news related to the hostage situation. The head of the Mossad, Dedi Barnea, met with CIA Director William Barnes in Jordan in the last 24 hours. The two discussed the hostage deal, and in a rare move at the end of this meeting, the Mossad published its own statement, stating that Hamas is torpedoing the deal out of an expectation that international pressure on Israel is on the rise, and thus it is in the group's interest to allow things to escalate in the Gaza Strip, because this will then in turn lead to more pressure on Israel to come to better terms and possibly a ceasefire as the group demands. The Mossad also added, however, that negotiations are consistently ongoing, even if they're not ongoing in the highest levels. There's always negotiations that are developing between the different sides in order to try to come to a deal. In addition to this, amidst the pressure that the U.S. is applying on Qatar to in turn apply pressure on Hamas, the Wall Street Journal quoted officials in Hamas and Egyptian sources today stating that Qatar has threatened to expel the Hamas leadership from the country if they cannot compel the Gaza leadership of Hamas to come to an agreement. Hussam Bardan, who is a senior Hamas official, was interviewed in the Wall Street Journal and denied such threats were made, adding that Hamas continues to demand a complete ceasefire and IDF withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, and stating that while the movement is continuing negotiations, if no deal is reached, this may lead to escalations in the West Bank and East Jerusalem during Ramadan. So this again leads us back to the expectation that both in Israel and different negotiators have raised that Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, expects that during the month of Ramadan, there will be other escalations from Palestinians either in the West Bank or within Israel, or possibly even from Hezbollah in Lebanon, which will then facilitate Hamas's position in negotiations, and that is one of the reasons that Hamas is being very steadfast in these terms, which they know that Israel is likely not going to agree to. Moving on to the Gaza Strip, there were no rockets or mortars fired from the Gaza Strip targeting Israel in the last 24 hours. Regarding the fighting in the Gaza Strip, in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, gun battles were reported in the Beit Hanun area. IDF air cover targeting Hamas operatives on the ground was also noted, and this means that there is increasing activity in Beit Hanun. This has not been officially declared by the IDF. However, after the IDF completed its operation in Zaytun, it was speculated that they're going to start more ground operations in other parts of the north. It was speculated this may be in Jabalia refugee camp. Thus far, this is not been reported. However, in the last several days, there's been more and more reports of violent activity in Beit Hanun, so this may be where the IDF is turning its attention next. In the central parts of the Gaza Strip, there were bombings reported in the Deir el-Balah area as well as in El Nusrat refugee camp. Close to 20 people were reported killed in these different bombings. There was no specification of the IDF regarding what was actually targeted in these different areas. Most of the fighting in these two parts, in Deir el-Balah and El Nusrat refugee camp, are on the outskirts of the camp, around the areas that the IDF is maintaining in the central parts of the Gaza Strip. However, it is always possible that this is leading up to an invasion of the IDF into these areas. Every time there is a bombing, there's more speculation, possibly this is leading up to an invasion. Right now, thus far, there's no ground forces on the ground in these two areas. In the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, in Han Yunis, that's where the bulk of the fighting is still located, substantial IDF activity was reported in Hamed City today, with Hamas radio stating that intensive bombings occurred in the area and that buildings were on fire. The IDF reported that over 20 Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad operatives were killed in the region in the last 24 hours, and substantial weaponry and explosives were uncovered. Tunnel entrances were also continuously uncovered throughout the regions of Hamid City. This is the northwestern parts of Han Yunis. In addition, the IDF is reportedly expanding its activity in the El Karara region. This is in the eastern parts of Han Yunis. Substantial weaponry was uncovered in the area, and the IDF reported attacking several Hamas operatives from the sky, including operatives carrying substantial weaponry on them, which caused secondary explosions in this region. In addition to this, in the most southern town in Rafah, the Al-Masri Towers, which are the tallest buildings in Rafah, were attacked last night. The IDF stated that civilians were evacuated prior to the attack, and that the buildings were being used by Hamas's emergency committees as staging grounds for terror activity in the region. No casualties were reported in this attack, which, according to Palestinian sources, included 5 different bombing raids that targeted the building from different sides. So again, no casualties were actually reported. However, very symbolically, these are the tallest buildings in the area, and possibly this indicates that the IDF is, like it did in Han Yunis, preparing the ground, so quote unquote, trying to target these different staging areas of Hamas before it carries out any invasions of Rafah. Other news related to the Gaza Strip. The IDF Chief of Staff and the head of the Israeli Shabak authorized plans for continued operations in Gaza in the last 24 hours. The fact that this was made public, and specifically it was made public that they authorized plans in relation to expanding the operations, is more likely Israel trying to signal its intent to escalate the fighting in Gaza if a hostage deal is not reached, rather than actually having any strategic value. Even if these plans were approved in the last 24 hours, this is something that's constantly done. The meetings between the heads of the different military establishments and heads of security in Israel, usually it is not published. The fact that it was published is trying to make very, very open the fact that the different heads of the organizations are approving plans should the IDF decide to expand and escalate the operations further. Other news, the IDF dropped thousands of newspaper leaflets in the areas west of Rafah in another issue of the quote-unquote newspaper that the IDF publishes called Reality in the Gaza Strip. And the cover page, there were images of Hamas leaders abroad, Ismail Haniyeh, the official leader of Hamas, and Khalid Mashal, the former leader of Hamas and currently one of the most senior officials. They are shown feasting on a table during Ramadan in contrast to starving Gazans in the Gaza Strip. On a different page, cartoons also show Haniyeh saying, "Stay strong," while he is eating, as well as Osama Hamdan, who is one of the leaders of Hamas in Lebanon, that is sending Ramadan greetings from Lebanon to Gaza, in contrast to a woman holding her baby amidst the Gaza destruction. Every time the IDF publishes these leaflets, it is usually coinciding with the IDF trying to put more pressure on the population to, quote-unquote, turn against Hamas. There have been more and more protests reported by the Gaza Liberators Movement and other different protests in the Gaza Strip of Palestinian civilians who are criticizing Hamas for the way the war has been run and for what has happened to them in the Gaza Strip. Like leading up to Ramadan, the IDF is anticipating that there's going to be more people visiting mosques, and the IDF is possibly fearful that Hamas is going to regain some ground in the hearts and minds of the civilian population, and likely this is what precipitated the dropping of these leaflets at this time. Regarding casualties, one IDF soldier was reported killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. Incidentally, this soldier specifically is the cousin of Bezalel Smotrich, the Israel's finance minister and leader of the religious Zionism party. This brings the total number of IDF soldiers killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began to 248. 6 IDF soldiers are reported injured in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of IDF soldiers injured in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began to 1,474. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip is reporting that 82 Palestinians were killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of Palestinians killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 30,960. 72,524 Palestinians are reported injured in the Gaza Strip since the war began, and there are still several thousand Palestinians that are buried under the rubble and presumed dead. Moving on to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, different U.S. sources responded to the developing plans for the construction of a temporary pier in the Gaza Strip to allow the facilitation and entry of humanitarian aid by sea. They stated that the estimated costs of this pier are going to be tens of millions of dollars over the next 6 months. Now, it's important to note that it was unclear in this report if they meant that the pier is going to cost tens of millions of dollars, or if this entire operation, including the entrance of aid, is going to cost tens of millions of dollars. However, what they did explicitly state is that Israel opening more entry points in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip in order to allow aid trucks in would actually be a much more efficient way to get aid into Gaza, as the pier itself is going to take several weeks to build, and the logistics of transporting aid between countries, then arriving in Cyprus, then undergoing Israeli inspection, then arriving in Gaza, then being disseminated, is actually going to be much more complicated. Meanwhile, the U.S. Central Command reported today that a logistical ship is making its way to the Mediterranean already, stating that the ship is carrying the preliminary equipment for establishing the pier in Gaza. Related to this, the IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari also added information about the development of this maritime corridor today. He stated that the IDF is coordinating the establishment of the temporary pier and the inspection of the aid and how that's going to work, adding, importantly, that the international aid agencies are going to be the ones that distribute the aid within Gaza. Now, this is important because there's been a lot of questions raised regarding how the aid is actually going to be distributed within the Gaza Strip. The United States is reportedly going to be in charge of this whole operation and transporting the aid and building the pier. However, it has been repeatedly stated that no U.S. soldiers are going to set foot in Gaza, and so how is the aid actually going to be distributed? What we know thus far, as a result of the different leaks and piecing the plans together, is that the aid is going to be funded largely by the United Arab Emirates. However, other countries have also stated they're going to take part in the funding. It is then going to arrive in Cyprus. From there, it is going to be inspected by Israel or by the IDF or by people who the IDF trusts. It remains to be seen. Then it is going to be transported to this pier in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. That pier is going to be secured and protected by the IDF. However, the IDF also added today that international aid agencies are then going to be the ones who distribute the aid within Gaza. All of those different moving parts may have something to do with what the different sources in the United States are saying. This is going to be a logistical nightmare, and in fact it would be a lot easier if more aid trucks were simply allowed to enter the Gaza Strip, possibly from the north, or even from the south. Remains to be seen. Remains to be seen how this plan actually comes together, and are all these moving parts going to work together, or if there's going to be a smoother mechanism that is developed. Other news related to the humanitarian situation. The head of UNRWA, Philip Lazzarini, stated that the agency is on its last legs and may be dismantled, adding, and I quote, "What's at stake is the fate of Palestinian Gazans today." Amidst this, Canada yesterday announced that it is restoring UNRWA's funding, and today Sweden also announced it is also going to restore the funding that was suspended to UNRWA after all the suspicions about UNRWA workers who participated in the October 7th attack. Responding to this, Israel condemned the intent to reinstate UNRWA's funding, stating, and I quote, "Restoring funding to UNRWA will not change the fact that the agency is part of the problem and will not be part of the solution in the Gaza Strip." Other news, another round of aid paradropping was carried out today. This was carried out by several different planes, including 2 from Jordan, 1 Egyptian plane, 4 U.S. planes, 2 French planes, and 1 Belgian plane. According to local sources, in the paradroppings there were also some aid packages, which again the parachutes failed to open, and the crash resulted in several Palestinians being injured. A few days ago there was an accident where parachutes failed to open and 5 Palestinians were killed. According to reports today, no Palestinians were killed, but several were injured as some of the parachutes failed to open. Moving on to the West Bank, there was substantial IDF activity reported in several different parts of the West Bank in the last 24 hours. Most of these were reported in the Ramallah area. These were both in the heart of Ramallah as well as in the areas of Birzeit. There were other IDF activity was reported in the areas of Tulkarem. A total of 15 Palestinians were reported arrested over the last 2 days in the West Bank. The IDF has not put out any of these reports. This is according to the Palestinian Prisoner Club. Yesterday they did not report how many Palestinians were arrested. Today they reported that 15 were arrested in the last 2 days. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel, southern parts of Lebanon, the continuous escalations of the last several days were also noted today. A barrage of 6 rockets were fired from Lebanon, targeting the northern parts of Israel today towards the upper Galilee. In addition, rockets were also fired towards the areas of Margaliot, Menara, Misgav Am, and Kiryat Shmona. Other attacks early in the day also targeted the areas of Fesuta, Matat, Al-Kush, Horafish, and Netuah and Iftach. Hezbollah also claimed that it fired Burkan missiles towards IDF outposts in the last 24 hours. There are also several border incidents that were noted. Regarding IDF activity, IDF warplanes reportedly attacked Hezbollah military structures in the Ita Sha'ab area, as well as targeting military command centers in the Majd al-Zun and Kafra regions. Hezbollah infrastructure in the Mechihav region were also attacked. Earlier attacks targeted Hezbollah infrastructure in Alavona as well. In addition to this, Al-Ahbar reported attacks in the Bleda village and in Misal Jabal, and Al-Manar, which is another Hezbollah affiliate, also reported artillery fire in the Al-Wazani region. In addition to this, according to reports in Lebanon, 2 people were injured in the attack that targeted the house in Adaharia. The report added that 2 missiles were fired at the house but did not explode. Later in the day, and I'll say this is moments before recording this, so I don't have a lot of details about this, there was a report by officials in Lebanon that 5 people were killed and 9 people were injured in the IDF attack in the Khir Batsalem region. The IDF did not report what it had targeted in this region. We'll likely learn more about this tomorrow. Other news, Reuters reported today that Jesse Baker, who's a senior official in the U.S. Treasury, visited Beirut last week in order to apply pressure on local councils and local leaders to stop money transfers to Hamas through Lebanon. According to reports, Baker applied pressure on Lebanon to go after the illegal financial services bureaus. A lot of these have sprouted up in Lebanon and become popularized due to the collapse of the banking industry in Lebanon in the last 4 years. The spokesperson for the Bank of Lebanon confirmed that officials met with Baker last week, describing the meetings as very productive. He added, however, that while the bank is doing its part, the actual prosecution of illegal financial activity is not within the bank's purview. What we're learning from this is that the officials in Lebanon and the Lebanese government are publicly stating that they are meeting with these U.S. officials and recognizing the importance of this, however also stating that they do not have the means to go after the illegal money activities that are going on primarily in southern Lebanon. It's important to know the economy in Lebanon in the last several years has completely crashed. Inflation has reached over 90%, and thus, while U.S. pressure on different establishments in Lebanon can bear fruit, at least politically or diplomatically, actually translating this to the ground is going to be much harder. Moving on to some of the regional developments, the United States military announced that the Houthis carried out a major attack against different ships in the Red Sea, specifically noting that the U.S. intercepted 15 Houthi drones that were launched simultaneously. Hours later, the Houthi spokesperson Yahya Saria stated that the Houthis attacked a U.S. ship in the Gulf of Aden with several nautical missiles, and in addition that 37 drones carried out attacks against several different U.S. destroyers in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. In addition to this, the French military reported that 4 drones targeting the EU task force in the Gulf of Aden were intercepted today, and the United Kingdom also reported intercepting 2 other drones in the region. The levels of these attacks in the last several days, and specifically the one today, are relatively unprecedented for the Houthis, and it is possible this is associated with the upcoming month of Ramadan and the Houthis' intent to have more speculative attacks in order to broadcast to their population. Moving on to some of the political and general trends for the last 24 hours. In an MSNBC interview today, U.S. President Biden was asked about the war and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's performance in the war. He stated that Netanyahu has the right to defend Israel, but added, and I quote, he must pay more attention to the innocent lives lost as a consequence of the actions taken. He then added, in what appears to be an escalation of rhetoric, and possibly the harshest rhetoric that Biden has used about Netanyahu, at least publicly, since the war began, that Netanyahu is hurting Israel more than helping Israel, as a result of the actions that are being taken, specifically with relation to the loss of Palestinian innocent lives, and how this is portraying Israel to the world. He was asked if there are red lines with regards to Netanyahu, and he agreed that the invasion of Rafah would be a red line. However, he then added that while he will never abandon Israel and never leave Israel and always support Israel militarily, he also stated, and I quote, you cannot have 30,000 more Palestinians dead as a consequence of going after Hamas. So what we're seeing is, again, another escalation in the rhetoric, specifically with regards to Netanyahu, and Biden saying not only is an invasion of Rafah at this point a red line with regards to his relationship with Netanyahu, but also that he specifically sees that this is not helping Israel in its war efforts against Hamas, but is in fact hurting Israel in their efforts both internationally and specifically with regards to winning the war. Other political news, there were substantial protests throughout Israel today calling for a hostage deal and overthrowing the government. Some protesters continued to block the main roads and the highways around Tel Aviv, and several people were arrested. Other political news, Turkish President Erdogan expressed his support for Hamas today, stating in his speech that no one can compel us to recognize Hamas as a terror group. He added that Turkey stands firm behind the Hamas leadership, adding that Netanyahu and his government have earned themselves a place alongside Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin as the modern-day Nazis. Other political news, Israel is reportedly beginning preliminary exploration of purchasing a port in Cyprus. This is supposed to be part of a long-term investment which will also be geared towards facilitating and inspecting aid that arrives into Gaza, both as part of this U.S. plan as well as after the war, as well as serving as an emergency port in the event of escalations with Hezbollah and attacks that may be leveled against the port of Haifa. Moving on to the future of the Gaza Strip. Continuing the harsher tone of President Biden, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris also gave an interview today to CBS, and she was asked if the United States is considering stopping its military aid to Israel. She responded by stating that you have to distinguish and not conflate between the Israeli government and the Israeli people, stating that the Israeli people, like the Palestinian people, have a right to live in peace and security. She added that the U.S. will always do what is necessary to ensure the safety of Israel and its citizens, but said that the U.S. has been very clear, and I quote, "This conflict has to come to an end as soon as possible, and how it does so matters. We need the hostages out and the humanitarian aid in, and ultimately we need a two-state solution. We've been very clear that far too many innocent Palestinian civilians have been killed. Israel has to do better on that issue. It has to allow more aid in, and we need this ceasefire over the course of at least 6 weeks and a truce in order to allow for the much-needed support to get to innocent civilians in the Gaza Strip." So again, what we are seeing is that not only is the U.S. continuing to be more explicit about pushing a two-state solution and specifically talking about this sort of plan that it has for the Middle East, possibly in association with Saudi Arabia, normalization talks with Israel, etc., but that specifically the U.S. administration is becoming more public about its criticism of Prime Minister Netanyahu and of the Israeli government. Yesterday I reported that after Biden's State of the Union speech on Thursday, he was heard in a microphone telling a few senators that he has told Netanyahu that they're going to have a come to Jesus talk. It appears that the U.S. administration has recognized and is starting to act upon the fact that Netanyahu is not in line with their vision for the Middle East. Possibly this is associated also with their meetings with Minister Gantz and what they would like to see as possibly a government change in Israel. Again, a lot of this is speculation. Mostly what we're seeing is a very, very harsh escalation in rhetoric of criticism with regards to the government of Israel. If you enjoyed these reports, please remember to subscribe, give them a like. If you want to know when reports are put out, turn on notifications. If you have questions or comments, leave them in the comment section below. That is my report for the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.